Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's conversation on diversity and anti-racism in entertainment design. We at USITT are proud to present this conversation alongside our partners at Live Design International. At a time where we need to hear, understand, learn, educate, and support our communities now more than ever. USITT represents a broad spectrum of artists, and our first core value is inclusion. We strive to be a place where people of various colors, creeds, nationalities, ethnicities, genders, and sexualities can come together to create art, to learn from one another, and to open our minds and hearts to inclusion's light. As a first step in helping America move forward, we commit to working against systematic injustice in an ongoing way and across all venues of life. Now, as we get started today, should you have any questions, please use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will do our absolute best to get all of these questions answered throughout today's session. We are aiming to keep this right at about 90 minutes today, and we hope that you'll stay with us right to the very end. I would now like to welcome my friend and today's moderator, USITT board member and production manager for Disney Parks Live Entertainment, David Stewart. David?
Hey, Cody. Thank you so much for the introduction. Really appreciate that and all the help that you're giving us. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Stewart, as Cody said. I'm also known as D Stew in the industry. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to lean in to this very important work around diversity and more specifically, anti-racism in the American theater. We have an amazing panel of individuals with tremendous amount of experience, both professionally and lived, and I couldn't be more honored to share this virtual space with them. A little bit of housekeeping. Number one is I may be looking up to ask to look at my board for questions. And number two, I have a dog sleeping in the background, so she may start barking. So pardon that. And I would love for my panelists to join us now. Look at all my friends.
Hey, David.
Looking all good. This is a good looking group of people. Roma, you joining us?
I'm told I can't start because the host stopped it.
Uh-oh.
One moment.
We'll have Cody work in the background for that.
There
we go. There we go. Now my heart is complete. Thank you, Cody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm so thrilled and honored that you have taken time out to join us and have this conversation. So we're going to do introductions, and I'm going to kick it over to Ebony first, and then she's going to pass the mic to our next panelist.
All right, so really, before I talk about myself, I have to pay it forward, and I need to thank a few folks really quickly. Lonnie Alcaraz mentioned my name to Xavier, and Xavier gave me a call and thought I would be a good fit for this conversation, so that's the first thank you. Rachel, I'm gonna speak a little bit for both of us here, so if any of this is out of line, tell me to shut up in our group chat. But in no particular order, Xavier, David, Roma, Portia, Larry, thank you for the way you have so elegantly navigated this industry while continuing to uplift the next generation of Black and brown designers. The way y'all have held space for us is so beautiful and so powerful. And if I was in a room with y'all, I would have chills, because every time, I'm trying to hold together, every time we talk, I get chills, so thank you for that. All right, about me, I am Ebony Madry, pronouns she, her, hers, born and raised in Houston, Texas, H-Town, baby. I hold 2 degrees in theatrical design, a BFA in design technology from Texas Tech University, 2013, and an MFA in lighting design from the University of California, Irvine, 2017. Between undergrad and grad school, I worked as an electrics assistant at Arkansas Repertory Theatre in Little Rock, Arkansas. Shortly after receiving my MFA, I started working for a production company called Bright Ideas Complete Technical Solutions as a project manager and lighting designer. Bright Ideas started as a lighting company 30 years ago, but they are now a video, audio, and lighting company. So going in, I had to learn a lot about the other disciplines in order to support and oversee them on site. I'm blessed to still be working from Bright Ideas, as we have turned a portion of our office and warehouse space into a virtual and live recording studio. and I have been bestowed the honor of being one of the primary LDs and programmers in that live studio. A really super quick plug, and I'll wrap this up. If you're in California and you're looking for a place to virtually record your event, or if you are somewhere else in the country or international and you're looking for a team to help you produce your fully virtual event, give us a call. We do absolutely everything from the heart, and we would be so happy to help you. All right, thank y'all for letting me hold that much space. I will pass the mic to Rachel.
Hey everybody, my name is Rachael Blackwell. Pronouns she, her, and hers. Ebony, my sentiments exactly. I'm so thankful and humbled to be here with you all. Thank you, Xavier, for reaching out to me and for everything that you've done thus far in my career. Kathy Perkins, thank you so much. David Grindle, thank you so much. Ramona Ward, Jeff Davis, Jennifer Zorno, thank you guys for pouring into me. Roma, thank you for responding to my email all those years ago when you didn't know me from Adam. I am a lighting designer freelance. I graduated with my BA in theater arts from the illustrious Alabama State University in Montgomery. And I just recently finished up my MFA in lighting design and technology from CCM in Cincinnati, Ohio. I also was so blessed to receive the Gilbert Hemsley Award this past summer. And so I'm excited and humbled about that.
Very, very proud.
Yeah, I'm just happy to be here. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy, this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Xavier.
Hello, everybody. My name is Xavier Pierce. He, him, his. Undergraduate at Florida A&M University, historically Black College and University in Tallahassee, Florida. Graduate degree at NYU for lighting design. Lighting designer. Mostly in regional theater, across the nation, a lot of dance and opera. So thank you for having me. I'll pass the mic to Larry.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lawrence Larry Bennett. I am the director of production at the Repertory Theatre of St. Louis. My pronouns are he, him, his. I did my undergraduate work at the Conservatory Theater Arts at Webster University, as well as my graduate work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Go Badgers. I hail from Houston, Texas, all day, every day. Happy to be here with this panel of lovely folks. So thank you all for having me here and having this discussion. I look forward to many more discussions like this in the future. I will pass it on to Ramona.
Larry, it's Roma.
Excuse me, Roma.
That's okay. Roma Flowers, she, her, hers. I received my BFA in lighting design a bazillion years ago from the Goodman School of Drama. I then hiked myself to New York City, where I was a freelance lighting designer, primarily for dance. And then in 2005, I joined the faculty of the dance department at Texas Christian University in the lovely, cool Fort Worth, Texas, where I was able to further explore creative ventures in screen dance and projection design. And I recently was a recipient of the LDI Night of Illumination Sword. I'm going to pass this to Portia.
I feel like everybody put a lot more work into their intros than I do, right? I'm Porsche McGovern. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a lighting designer, an independent researcher. I do the Who Designs and Directs in Lord Theaters by Pronoun series on HowlRound for the last 5 years. Now I feel like I need to add things because other people had more things. I have a BA in speech and theater from St. Lawrence University and an MFA in lighting design from Cal Arts a while back, we'll just say. And everybody else had so much more. But I'm so pleased to be a part of this panel. We've had many lovely discussions already, and it warms my heart to see us all together again. And I think I'm turning it back to David.
No, thank you. I felt like I need to say more things too, but apparently people want to see my dog. There she is. Isn't she cute? All right. All right, so let's dive in. Again, I appreciate you all so much, and more of this to come. So our first question is, we're hearing the term anti-racist quite a bit these days. What does the term anti-racist mean to you? So I'm gonna show up. Ebony, we're gonna go to you first.
So, okay, I know we've talked about this so many times, and really for me, the first time we had this conversation amongst ourselves, I didn't really want to give this question a space. I felt like as a Black queer woman, and as a Black queer woman often in a leadership role on a venue site or a show site, that my day is often spent educating people, right? Either getting people on my side to do the thing I need them to do because I know the way the client wants it, or just to do the job, period. So to spend more energy educating people again about this term, I was kind of off put by it. But the more it sat with me, the more it kind of resonated. And it is important to determine what anti-racism or anti-racist and anti-racism means. For me, it means people, non-Black, Indigenous, people of color, their actions and their words have to speak to anti-racism. You can't say anymore, I'm not a racist. It's not just words now. It has to be actions, and it has to be continuing to break the system of racist tendencies and systematic oppression. That's kind of where I'm gonna leave it.
Looking for my mute button. Yeah, Xavier, what were you gonna say, man?
Oh, I was gonna say I feel the same way, Ebony. That I've been involving on this topic for a minute, and I didn't want to give it space. But as I began to think about it, I start to realize that it's not enough to not be racist. That you definitely have to put words and actions to think that we're words and actions to dissolving systemic oppression. And it's not enough just to not say anything. And I think the biggest anti-racist should not look like me. You know, I think at this moment in time, I think people who don't look like me need to be able to speak up and wield their power to dismantling the thing that's been disenfranchising Black and brown people for over 400 years. So that's where I stand on that.
All right, I hear that, man. So looking for a lot more action and a lot less words, but we need to see the action that buttress up those words. Portia.
You know, I've been thinking about this a lot too. I was happy it was going to have space. For me, you know, I think about it in that aspiring way, right? Like I'm aspiring to be an anti-racist. It's a conscious daily decision to make choices in an equitable and just way. But that means looking at everything, right? Not just being on panels like this, but also where do I spend my money, right? When I want a book about anti-racism, where do I get it from? Do I do the research to get it from Black-owned bookstores, right? And it's a lot to do, but it's a lot that needs to be done. So in some ways, I feel like it's time. We all need to take the time to do this the right way.
Cool, thank you, Portia. Rachel.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's an ever-evolving thing, but for me, anti-racist is about being proactive versus being reactive. It's not about if A happens, then B happens. It's about how do we stop A from happening? How do we nip it in the bud and get to it at its root, at its core, so that it's not even something we need to think about. It needs to become something that's second nature to us. And like Portia said, something that's every day, you know, a conscious effort to keep striving for anti-racism. But I think, working on it from behind, like moving backwards, that's that's what it means for me, being proactive versus the reactive.
Thank you. Larry, you typed up a little note here as we were going. And
yes, sir. I echo what everyone has said, but I wanted to add that for me, anti-racism is an action, as Xavier was talking about. And someone said to me, which I really identify with, was as we move into this anti-racism moment, I don't want an ally, I want an accomplice. I want someone who's going to stay there and actively be in the fight with me and actively help push this agenda forward and not just be passive. And so as we start to have this conversation, the things that I'm looking for in the industry and in individuals are accomplices and not just allyship.
Right. The bodies. And trying to step away from performative allyship. So we're going to move on to our next question. A lot of what we are discussing in terms of structural racism lies in who holds power. How can we get more BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, and people of color, into positions of power and leadership in predominantly white institutions? And Xavier, do you want to speak? Oh, actually, I'm going to go to Ebony because you said something about your posse that I really liked.
Yeah, so I feel like, okay, first off, I'm a person that loves a good network, and like kind of going off of what Larry's saying, I feel like that's all I've done is get accomplices, right? Like people that like, I know they're gonna have my back day in and day out. So I feel like if I have those people with me, whether it is through a text message that I can say, hey, something is really screwed up on site, like how would you fix this thing, right? Or oh my God, I have a Vectorworks question, I can't figure this out. Those people, I know they're my people, right? They're my back. And I've always said to those people, like, if I'm working, you're working, because we're all gonna eat here because we all have each other's back. So I think that it's important, especially for me, and I feel like that's how I have navigated these predominantly white institutions, is by gaining allies, right? Whether those allies are other POCs or if they are, white people. I think that it is important to have a network in allies and accomplices that are of a diverse group of people, if that answers that question.
My mute button is someplace different than it is for my workplace, so I'm always like going to my Disney place instead of for here in Zoom. No, thank you for that. I'm going to jump in here a little bit. The one thing that I think that is missing, and this is actually from a personal experience of coming up to the Guthrie, and I was excited for that experience to be the director of production for that institution, was that we talked about the learning curve, and it felt like coming up to a sheer bluff and having to just scale it vertically and not having those skill sets behind me in order to succeed in that position. I'm not saying that I didn't succeed in that, but it was just a trial to do that. And then specifically when people of color, specifically Black people, come into positions of leadership, we are expected to be the success story, right? So if we fail, then we fail holistically as a community instead of as individuals. White folks are given the opportunity to fail as an individual. You'll never come across an institution or a place where it's like, John failed as the director of production, therefore we're not going to hire any more white folks. But us failing, we fail as a community, and people look at it and go, the entire movement of equity, diversity, and inclusion is a failure. Can we move past that and get back to hiring who we want to hire? So in order for that not to be a thing, I think we need to engage in what I call gap training. It is one of the demands that someone noticed talking about the demands from ICU White American Theater. That is one of the demands that are in there. I think that it is something that we need to do across the industry, as in trying to give specifically the BIPOC community the skill sets necessary in order for us to succeed at all levels of leadership, be you a carpenter in a shop or on your way to being a director of production or an executive producer for an organization. And that entails HR training, long-range strategic planning, more budgeting skill sets, leadership and core value development, strategic planning, all those things that we so often do not get up and coming, and we are oftentimes not exposed to or have access to. I think it is time that we find space to be able to get educated in that place. So I think that we need to do more in that arena. Actually, I want to kind of come back to the anti-racist, and Roma, there are people asking, why did I skip Roma? And I want to let everyone know that we've met a few times, and we have a script that we are attempting to follow, and certain people wanted to speak on certain things. So I didn't want to think anyone that we had purposely skipped Roma. But Roma, if you wanted to say anything to anti-racism, I'm opening back.
I don't want to add much to what was already said, but a couple of things that were said that Ebony spoke about, working hard to get people on my side. Sometimes I feel I'm working extraordinarily hard to get people on my side. And while I'm also dealing with my racist tendencies all the time, every day, in every situation, particularly in an academic institution, you can imagine. I also want to speak to that tendency for Black people to think we have to educate everybody else about it. Yes, I need to educate myself. I don't want the responsibility of having to do other folks' work for them. I'll help, but I don't want to do the work. I don't think I should be asked to. And that's really the only thing I wanted to add to that portion of our discussion.
Thank you for that. So back to the power question, was there anybody else that wanted to speak to that? I want to make sure and give space for that.
David, I kind of wanted to have you go into, we had discussed this question before.
Right.
And you're really talking about opportunities for, or access for professional development. And I think it would be helpful if you could talk about sort of more specifically how that would evolve, how that would be actionable, because I'm interested in knowing that.
Sure. And this is me kind of rough drafting this idea of gap training. And I don't see it as some sort of 3-day workshop. I don't see it as some that USITT offers a 3-day workshop on this. I think it needs to be an immersive experience that has academic rigor given to it, and that we actually have a train the trainer session where the people who are going to go and teach these sessions, because they all may not be people of color, and they all may not be facile in the area of equity, diversity, inclusion, that we go in and we train these trainers that would do this work, and that they were educated around BIPOC issues and equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging vocabulary and work. And then we go into just a series of training, and I think that is something that, again, that is done over an extended period of time. And I wanted to see it happen at all stages of someone's career development, but particularly like young people. Like I can see very easily like someone like Rachael or Ebony taking part in this and giving them where they feel that they have these gaps in their knowledge, and where we can fill in those gaps with this kind of training, so that someone at one point in time when I was kind of riffing on this idea said, oh great, so they can go in and they can speak that language of corporate theater or theater. I'm like, no. I want them to have their own voice. What I want to do is make sure that they have the toolbox in order to step forward into these leadership positions, because so often we're like, oh, you don't know how to cultivate boards, or you don't know how to deal donor relationships, so we're not going to consider you. And I want to be able to sit there and go, no, I have all these tools in my backpack, and I'm ready to go. So I'm ready to do these things. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, Roma, or if
it does. It does, and that's what you had spoken about, and I just wanted you to say it out loud here.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that we talked about in our group, oftentimes the subcommittees or the lead up to these are a fascinating conversation in and of themselves. It's like you have that person that's a carpenter in a shop, and they go and they get these skills, and then they become the shop floor person, and then they become the assistant technical director, and then they become the technical director. Meanwhile, still evolving with these skill sets and keeping the level up accountable. So then the TD keeps the director of production accountable, and then they become a director of production, and then they can keep their staff accountable, and they can keep their executive leadership accountable. And if they ever step into that C-suite, that executive suite of artistic director or managing director, then they can keep their board accountable or dismantle that board and start again, so that we are truly starting to dismantle these systems.
Yeah.
Go ahead. X.
Yeah, X.
Oh, I was going to say that that having people of color in those positions of power, because when we're in those positions of power, we hire who looks like us, and so to keep the institution and to keep it sort of fed with people of color, we need to start having people at the top, people who will power, people who can, advocate for people who look like them. And so I think it's about numbers of people of color in the industry, but I also think it's about diversity in story. I think numbers is a great way of getting people into the industry, but also having it believing in the idea that we tell better stories from a wide array of diverse backgrounds, and I feel like that's where we should be headed. Is how can we tell the best stories to get more people in those seats, so we can live off our craft.
Right. For so long, the industry has so long, 7 years, has focused on we'll diversify. For so long, it was we'll do the black show in February with the black director while we're doing Fences, right? And then we're trying to break out of that mold and diversify the canon. We're trying to diversify the actors that we see on stage. But where the focus wasn't until 5 years ago, 6 years ago? Backstage. We were never talking about diversifying designers. We sure were not talking about diversifying scene shops, costume shops, things like that. That is a fairly recent endeavor, and we are part of the world builders as well. And as Xavier was saying, that we need a multiplicity of perspectives in building those worlds so that we can bring a better story. Larry, you were going to say something around this.
Yes, sir. Going back to the power discussion and how do we shift that, so oftentimes institutions are tapping the same wells when they're looking for higher powers position. You're talking about your ADs, your EDs, your director of productions, things of that nature. And there's no one in those organizations to expand that well or expand where they can start looking for this talent elsewhere. And so I think it's incumbent on, as we get into this anti-racist, disrupting white supremacy mode as we move forward with these organizations, have the folks to have the agency to say, have you looked into these communities, or have you looked into these groups or these subsets of people who also have the talents that you're looking for? So often it's just a repeated cycle of I know a person who knows a person and never steps outside of that network. Right. So it's incumbent upon us now to make sure that folks are doing their due diligence and getting a wide array of people into these positions by not looking into the usual spaces and approaching the usual suspects.
Absolutely. And the one thing that, a question kind of came up about how do we find these folks? And the thing is that oftentimes these organizations just expect people of color just to come to them, right? And there's no community building. We're going to talk about community building a little bit later, but you've got to go out and you've got to start developing legitimate relationships with these communities. And you can't sit there and go with fakeness, because we'll see right through it. Be like, you just rolling up in here for it because you want something. You're not here because you want to do something about this situation. So you got to go out and start cultivating those, and that work rests with you.
Yeah.
Max, are you trying to say something?
I was just going to dovetail that there's historically Black colleges and universities that have theater departments who have talented young people out there willing to going to other organizations to learn and gain access to the industry. And so the first step is to reach out to those people there. They'll be more than willing to send their children and send their students into those organizations to be educated. So there's a wealth of people and students out there who can do that.
I'd also like to recommend, it seems every metropolitan area has high schools of the performing arts. Very often their populations are very diverse and are great sites for recruitment as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Anybody else have anything that you want to contribute around power in predominantly white institutions or in the industry at large? Cool. So this is for my designer folks, and I'm actually going to rope Larry into this too, from being on the other side of the table as a director of production. As designers, you walk through so many spaces. Please talk to us about spaces that feel good versus the ones that don't, and why. And I'm going to start with Rachel, please.
Yeah, so I just want to start by saying representation really matters. Me personally, it was just in February, I was in Houston at the Alley with Xavier, assisting him on a show. And I got there a couple days before him, and everybody there was really warm, really welcoming. They went out their way to introduce themselves to me, and I did feel welcomed. But if I'm being completely honest, it wasn't until Xavier came in and I saw him, and he was just unapologetically Black, and he took up space, and I was like, okay. And I was immediately so a little more subdued. And it was the same experience assisting Kathy Perkins up at Yale. I got there a few days before her, and took care of some things, and again, very welcoming environment. But it wasn't until she got there that I felt like I belonged a little bit better. And it's not so much as, me saying I'm uncomfortable working in predominantly white spaces, or I can't do my job effectively if I don't see somebody else there who looks like me. But simply put, representation matters, because again, when they were able to come into those spaces and I was able to see somebody, again, in a higher position than me, in that power position, calling all the shots, then it's like, it was empowering to me, and it was exciting, and I was able to, again, effectively just embrace my Blackness in the space as well.
Thank you, Rachel.
To echo off of Rachel, I think you're so right, Rachel. Representation does really matter. I mean, being able to walk into a space and know that the people that you're looking at, the people that look back at you look like you, makes you feel more comfortable. At least makes me feel more comfortable. When I go into spaces sometime and all I see is people who don't look like me, predominantly white institution, I'm a little on edge, and sometimes it affects the work, because sometimes the work is built upon trust. Directors is all about trust, actors is all about trust. And so if you come into a space and you feel like you can't trust anybody, especially if you need to make a change or something, then it could get pretty tense. The best spaces that I've worked in, that I felt like completely at home with, was at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. When I came on campus, they had a big flag that said Black Lives Matter, or when I went to the public and everybody was different. They were diverse in so many different ways. I mean, seeing the reflection of America makes me feel comfortable and able to sort of, do my job.
Tagging into like a little bit of what Xavier said about spaces in like, I feel like whenever I started working in project and production management, because I didn't really have that language vocabulary and all my vocabulary was lighting based, I felt like every time I sent an email, I was over explaining, right? Not, and now that I think about it, I don't know that I was over explaining because I was uneducated, because I have the basic vocabulary, but I felt like maybe I was over explaining because I needed that trust. I needed them to trust me. First off, I'm very young walking into a leadership role, but also being very young and Black walking into that leadership role in an industry where it is predominantly older white men. So how do I take space and hold space as a leader? That was something that I feel like I just recently kind of came into as a project manager. So it was definitely a journey, but I felt like I was always over explaining myself and sending very long emails. And then I would look back and be like, why'd you give them so much detail? But I needed them to know that I had the answers. So when I say something, trust me on site, is basically that.
Youngsters, you Rachel and Xavier and Ebony, I think it's a testament to how things have changed that you can even speak about going into a space and feeling more comfortable because there are people that look like you. For much of my career, I have walked into spaces where I was the only one. What was the difference in places that made me feel safe? I have to say it was feeling that I was getting that basic respect for my position as soon as I walked in the door, or did I feel like I had to do, as Ebony you were talking about, did I feel I had to overcompensate to be sure they knew that I knew what I was doing? And that's the difference of safety in a space or not. I didn't often have that. There's someone like me that I can feel instant rapport with. It often wasn't there. It can happen even in phone calls, depending on what group I'm working with or was working with at the time. Yeah, I got a lot of pushback when I was lighting designer for Urban Bushwomen because it was assumed I was Black, I'm sure. And I got a few more questions about, well, why this light, why not that light? Why this procedure and why not that procedure? That made me feel unsafe. And I would be kind of on my edge walking into spaces like that. Then on the other hand, I worked with some incredible all-white crews. I have to do a shout out to BAM. I have to shout out to the union crew at Symphony Space. All of those gentlemen treated me from day one with the utmost respect. So that was it. That's what it was about.
Thank you, Roma. Portia?
And I've never felt completely safe in a space because I never know where the microaggression or where the comment is going to come from, right? I don't see it coming generally. And I'm not quite quick-witted enough to come back, right? To have a comeback to things. Generally, I'm just still sort of shocked that somebody is saying something directly to me about it. You know, I have found people who are safe, right? I've found individuals who are safe, and I've tried to continue to work with them because I do feel safe with them. But in general, I suppose I don't, especially going into a new space, I expect to have to prove myself. I expect to have to name drop to get a certain amount of respect, which I don't like the practice of name dropping. But do I use it when I feel like I need to in order to get my notes done? Yeah, I do. I'm sad that I have to do it. Right, but you know, as designers, at least I don't get to like pick, right? If I just picked, I would never go anywhere, right? I would never design anything again. So sometimes I just keep thinking about the paycheck, all right? That like with this money, you will be able to do this if you can get to opening night and they will hand you that next check. You're smiling like, mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's real, super real. Before I depart our designers, any of you have any more that you want to share with that?
I mean, I just feel like as a POC designer, you just have to be really good about navigating spaces and be really adept at reading the room, being really adept at seeing where things are going, and I think more so than my white counterparts, because it could get treacherous, and you need to be really on guard about your sort of artistic life. You know, if you don't have any rapport with anybody in the room and nobody looks like you, you can't go in and say, "Hey, how did that go?" or "What's going on?" It's kind of hard to defend yourself against, sometimes the attacks. So I would just say that, I'm always thinking about that when I go into new spaces. Not so much not so much now that I'm in my career now, because I've been a lot of places. I come with a little bit of, I come with a little bit more confidence, but especially back when I first started out, I had to be really, really, really cautious of, what I said, who I said, or just, I had to be really, really cautious.
Right. But now that you get old.
Yeah, now that I get old, it's me, I'm here.
I'm the oldest guy here, oldest person here, so I get to say that. All this gets to say that. So I want to jump over to you, Larry, man. So oftentimes we as production managers or directors of production, we are not jumping from organization to organization. So we are at our home base. We are at the Rep, we are at Disney, we are at fill in the blank organization. So one, I have two questions for you, Larry. One is, how does that differ from our designers that are often transient and are moving from organization to organization, even though they start to feel a greater degree of comfort as they return back to certain organizations? What is it like for you to sit at an organization? And my second question is, what do you do, what do you feel as a Black man that you may need to do a little bit extra to make sure that our designers of color are taken care of, and staff?
Yeah, those are excellent questions. The first part of that question, I will say it's important for me as I get designers into my door to have an open dialogue with them, because the enemy of this anti-racist movement is complacency, right? I don't ever want to feel like we've reached a place where the work is done. And so conversations with the designers who come in about how I can make our institution better and make sure that they feel safe and comfortable is paramount. And so I want to know what works, what doesn't work, if you felt microaggressions, how that was, what that was, who came to you, how it came to you, et cetera, et cetera. Because what's valuable in that information, especially when you talk about institutions that have long history and long tenure, if you get enough people from the outside saying the same story, it helps breed change faster. And it's not just the one Black voice in the corner that one time on that one show. It's, look at these array of designers that I've brought in. They're all saying we have this issue of microaggression in X, Y, and Z department or in X, Y, and Z way. How can we now make this change? Because this just isn't an isolated thing that we can brush off. And so encouraging the designers to have those difficult conversations with the director of production and production managers to help make those changes, because those voices become very, very important. And so I try to be cognizant of engaging in those conversations, not leaving on the designer to come to me, but often I try to come to their table during the tech process. How are you doing today? How are you feeling today? Is there anything wrong? What can I do? What can I change? Because I want the conversation to be ongoing. And then I follow up with an email and say, hey, tell me about your experience. Let me know if there's anything that you couldn't say at the time or feel more comfortable saying in an email. And so that's how I approach the incoming artists to our organization. In terms of staff, it's about not being complacent. It's about getting to the hearts and the minds of the people who are here and trying to bring in people who understand that change needs to happen, right? We all understand that at least I hope we all understand, that theater was built on this idea of white supremacy, and moving forward, how do we dismantle that? Means we can't do the things we've always done, and being able to honestly question all of our practices and policies. And that's a very difficult conversation. And it's hard to move the needle without any concrete examples or concrete opinions from either folks on the inside or outside. And so accomplices become very important. People who look and think like you, or people who think like you and know that the needle needs to change, you know, and being able to have those conversations with upper management. And sometimes it's like beating your head against the wall, but I take it upon myself to do this work, because even if I don't get where I want to be, hopefully that I will open the door for the person behind me to continue that work. And so being able to be the squeaky wheel, to get the grease, to make sure that we're not being complacent and we're always moving forward becomes important. I try to tell everyone who deals with me, I have broad shoulders and thick skin. There's nothing you can say to me that's going to hurt my feelings, but I want to make sure that we're ever moving forward and having those conversations.
Thanks, Dan. So I wanted to ask a question about, is it enough for a venue to start booking more diverse shows and hiring more BIPOC, or should they be more vocal about the move? It's amazing. It's a lot of that can just be performative, right? So you can have more diverse shows and you can bring in more people of color, but oftentimes if a person doesn't feel comfortable, if a person of color does not feel comfortable, they're going to leave in about 3 years, right? So we need to start also developing, we have to have a culture shift in our organizations. And the thing that many of you that have heard me talk before, or have heard me start talking about, not only is it equity, diversity, and inclusion, but it's belonging. So often we get hung up on the D, the diversity aspect of it. And diversity is just about numbers. Inclusion is about people, and belonging is about making sure people want to stay when they get there. I've been in organizations that I'm like, I don't want to stay here anymore. This is not a healthy place for me. And oddly enough, it took me coming to Disney before I felt like I belonged someplace. So I think that you can put all those shows up on stage, but if people don't want to come and don't want to stay, then what's the point, right? Now you're just kind of going through folks, and folks are like, I don't want to go back there. Now you're trying to find a whole new team of folks to come in. So I think you have to be very cognizant about what is actually happening in your organization with your staff. Do they have the training do they need? Are you holding people accountable for their actions? Does that reflect in their paycheck? Does it reflect in their performance evaluations? Have you stated what it is that you stand for? What is your mission value? What are your values? What are your core values? Are you going through those lenses? All those things are very, very important. So there's a lot of work that has to be done deep down in the DNA of an organization to truly affect change. Before we moved on from this question, was there any more that anybody wanted to contribute to this one? Cool. So we are going to move on. First of all, can everybody hear me? There was Rachel, you kind of popped a note in there, said that you were having a hard time hearing me. Is this better?
Yeah, I think if you just hold
Adjusted,
your headphones
right?
a little closer.
Is this okay?
That's awesome.
All right, so let's talk about training, recruitment, retention, allyship, or accomplices, and encouragement. And then we're going to feed this into community building. So the first step in this is, let's talk about, have a conversation around hiring, right? What does that look like for an organization? Why is it important? And also I think that we also have the training aspect of that in that question as well. So does anybody want to talk about hiring?
Yes,
Hi,
David.
Roma. Yes, please.
Yeah, I saw in one of the webinar chats or a question, someone asked about blind hiring. Should you just put out an ad, and can you just expect people of color to apply? I think you have to be way more aggressive about it, and way more aggressive into where you're promoting those kinds of job openings. I know there's the Black Designers Facebook page where every job that comes by Kathy's desk, virtual desk, is advertised. There's something about going through organizations like that or platforms like that that give that sense of comfort that Rachael and Xavier are talking about, that says, oh, okay, they're actually really going to look at me and not just throw that away. I think that that's an important part of hiring, is you have to be aggressive where you are, where you want to recruit. And I think that's the same for college programs as well. Where are you recruiting? Where are you going to try to look for people?
Thank you. And that also involves, like we talked about earlier, that community building. You can't just drop in like a career fair and go like, I'm here, come work for us. And you'll be like, no, I don't think so. You haven't done the work. We see that at USITT at some of the our vendors that are on the expo floor. And I'm like, I'm not going to go there. No one, and to an earlier point, there's no representation there. No one looks like me there. So I'm not going to go have that conversation with anyone there. It doesn't look like they want to have a conversation with me. So why would I do that? Anybody else want to talk about hiring?
You know, one quick thing I do want to back up Roma's point about is this idea of access, right? So when you're hiring for any position, you have to think about who has access to that posting. You know, USITT, they have to be a member. They have to have access to the website. You know, if you're posting on Art Search, they have to be a member. They have to have access to that website. You know, if you're posting on Backstage Job, they have to have access to the internet, access to that website. And so are you meeting people where they are to make sure that your post is getting to the folks you want it to get to? And so we as gatekeepers really have to look at that the access with which we are giving people to come to us. If we're only being, for lack of a better term, highbrow about it, or only posting on highered.com and, you know, USITT and Art Search and think that we're going to get the depth and breadth of candidates that we want to give, is foolish, because there's a lot of people who don't have that access. And so we have to be able to do the legwork and reach, again, outside of our complacency and saying, where don't we have a footprint, and where don't we have relationships, and how can we establish those relationships to start to cultivate those voices and those people? And so I challenge everyone, myself included, as we are starting the hiring processes, think about access. As you are posting this job, think about where you're posting it, and is it reaching the folks you want it to reach, to make sure that the candidates that you're receiving are the best and the brightest across all spectrums. And I can guarantee you, the way we have been doing it, the answer is no.
No, absolutely not. Anyone else on hiring before I throw my 2 cents in? Okay. So I think another point, and someone had brought this up in the questions, is also not strictly looking at the university as the sole pipeline, right? There's many ways to scale the mountain. One of the reasons I didn't apply for the Guthrie in the first place was the job description said you have to have an MFA, you have to have X amount of years in a multi-million-dollar theater and a multi-venue theater. Well, that they might as well have written that job description for 5 people, and they're all white guys, right? So there's this, in your job descriptions, you can actually, or conscious bias written into them so that you are only looking or end up with a small segment of people. So I think it's really important to, when I got there, I took out, when I rewrote the job descriptions, I took out the educational requirements. They're all gone for them. So no longer does it say you need to have an MFA in there, because I asked myself, and Roma and I had this conversation behind the scenes one day. It's like, well, why not? I was like, oh, no, if you have an MFA, I want you to apply, but what skill sets am I looking for in an ideal MFA candidate? The ability to have good oral and written skills, to be able to have critical analysis, to be able to do long-term planning. Then write those 4 things down in your job description. Not every MFA candidate has those things. And the people that have those things aren't necessarily MFA degree holders. So taking that out, I think does something to help with that hiring process. And I think also looking for, when you look at your final pool of candidates, I think it is critical that you have BIPOC representation on there. And I think that means that and we're not looking for quotas or we're not looking for tokenism. I need you to go out, cultivate relationships with the community, and find those talented bodies of color out there and bring them in. Go out there. The keys are in the room. Just find the keys. Look up under the cushions. Look under the couch. Look every place. Look for the talent. It's there. We're there. Go out there and find it. Stop being lazy about this and just looking in your back hip pocket for these folks, and go out there and find some people. Develop some relationships. Develop relationships with TCG, USITT, our Gateway program. We are here. Go out and find that talent, cultivate that talent. And then the hiring process becomes easier in that regard. Anything else on hiring before I get any more animated or pissed off about it? Okay. You over there laughing at me, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people have to think that those relationships are worth having. You know, that relationships with Black people or people of color are worth having. That they mean something. That their worth means something. That their background, their history, all the things that they've been through, their education means something and worth, like their diversity, their being is worth having in that space. And I think that comes from something that just is being human, you know, just being humane about, you know, about stories and about life. So
no,
that's something, and that's something that we can't teach, you know?
Right. Well, it's, you know, again, and oftentimes you have to start baking these things into policy of an organization. When I got to the G and I was working with Joe Hodge, one of the things we talked about doing was that no teams could be homogenous design teams. They had to be racially and gender diverse. And I was so thankful for that. But the first thing I did as a director of production, I'm like, oh shit, I don't have enough people of color that I know that I can go in and go do this. And I had to open up my network. And that's where I met Xavier, right?
Yeah.
And we've been fast friends ever since. I'm so thankful for that. Oh, see, there they go. I told you that was going to happen.
But also too, David, I mean, doing that actually allows, I know for me, that being in a situation at the Guthrie with, you know, doing Joe Hodge's first show at the Guthrie, I was introduced to Libby Apple. I had a great relationship with her. And then that, you know, tracked into Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So, I mean, those relationships and going outside of the bounds of, going outside of the bounds and bringing those people together actually spark careers. You know, it just doesn't start there. It has an ability to evolve. And so I think it's really, really, really important that, you know, Joe Hodge instituted that, you guys instituted that.
Yeah, it was a ripple effect, definitely a ripple effect that went through the institution. And it started shaking up some of the groundwork that embedded systematic racism that is in most institutions, right? It starts shaking up notions of narcissism, right? We're just going to know, we're going to hire who we know. And we have to start breaking those things up. All right. We're going to jump into, this seems to be a really hot topic, and we're going to jump into internships next. Who wants to handle this one first? Roma, you were like quick. You were like, Ebony, I'm going to let you go first.
Okay.
Ebony, get off.
Okay. No, do you want to go first, Roma? You can.
I want to go first. The first thing I would like to say is I would love it if everybody got rid of unpaid internships. I think that they are unethical, very base for so many different reasons. First and foremost, get rid of them. Put it in your budget. Put it in your budget. Internships, assistantships, apprenticeships, put it in your operating budget if that's what you want. Secondly, organizations can devote specific internships specifically for young people from underrepresented populations. Yeah, do it. And again, actively promote and advertise those kinds of internships, apprenticeships, whatever, scholarships. Yeah, go to where it needs to be seen. That's my soapbox. That's it.
Okay, really quick, and then I think Rachel wants to say something. So for me, I was very blessed and fortunate to do an internship at Arkansas Repertory Theater that was paid. If it was not paid, I don't know how I would have navigated it without the support of my family. I'm blessed to have a family that would support me in the arts, but because it was paid and because of the way that they set up the internship in such a way that I worked very closely with the master electrician. Like to this day, I text him, I call him all the time because I know that he has my back. So that relationship is a foundation that kind of propelled me in this industry. So I'm grateful, and I absolutely agree with Roma. Unpaid internships are just not feasible in our industry as artists. So I'm gonna toss it to Rachel or back to David. I don't know. I'm passing the mic.
I'm turning off my mic. That's what I'm doing. I think unpaid internships are actually illegal if I am tracking some of this right. So Rachel, yes, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about recruitment on the educational level. I went to a HBCU, a historically Black college and university, as opposed to a PWI for undergrad, predominantly white institution, for those who don't know. And I came from a very small program, and it was primarily actor-based. I was maybe one of 6 students who were interested in the technical side of things, whether that be stage management, costumes, or lights. And had it not been for a couple of my professors taking us, that group of people interested in tech, to USITT to see that, oh, I can make a career out of this, and to make those connections with people who are actively doing it, I don't think I would be here right now, because I had never heard of lighting design as a career. I had never heard of USITT. And so I think that recruitment, whether you're a grad program looking for more students of color, or if you're a company, an industry looking for more people of color to hire, I think that you guys should, because I saw a couple questions about where can we find these people, go to some HBCUs. I guarantee you nobody's visiting us. Give a masterclass, talk about what you guys do, and donate some equipment if you're not using it. We didn't have any LEDs or any fancy lights at my program. I didn't see any of that until I went to grad school. And so I think a huge part of this is going to be recruitment. And again, it can be on the high school level or the undergrad level, whether that student wants to go straight into the workforce or whether they want to pursue higher education. Just having that exposure, and Larry talked on it too, having access to these things, these tools, these workshops, these people will be a huge asset to your company and to these students in the future. So go out there, recruit, meet people, talk to the heads of these departments, and get to know some people, because I guarantee you we're out there. And like I said, had it not been for the people who came into my life doing this, then I guarantee you I would not be here right now.
Click, there we go. Yes, I am technologically challenged today. This is the wrong venue to be technologically challenged in front of a bunch of production folks, right? So thank you for that, everyone. And I want to echo and reinforce the importance of USITT, because I know that when I first came on and first met David, I met David Grindle before USITT. But 11 years ago when I first came there, we had the People of Color Network, and I remember going to that, and there were 7 of us. Out of 4,000 people attending, there were 7 of us. And a couple of years later, I remember meeting Rika and Roma, all these amazing, great people, and going, oh, there are other folks out here that look like me, and just really kind of glomming on to those folks. And then with the advent of the Gateway program, we just exploded. It's all of a sudden 7 didn't become 8, didn't become 10. It was like 7 became 45, became 350 all of a sudden. It was just so amazing to see, and a really telling sign that if we build it, they will come, and how much representation really does matter, because there were just but a few of us, right, Rachel? You know, just a few of us walking around that space, and then to see more bodies like us was really really important. Okay, I want to move into pay transparency and equity, and I'm going to lean to Portia on this one.
I just have a thing about like administration salaries versus production salaries, and how often, you know, I'm trying to figure out how to tell this story without being like, and it was these people. So once upon a time at a theater where I was staff, at a staff meeting, we were told we are going to hire these new administration fellows, but don't worry, they're only going to make $30,000 a year. And I exclaimed, most of the production folk, even with overtime, aren't making $30,000 a season. We're between being laid off in between shows, we're not making that. I was then never invited back to staff meetings, which I'm not so sure I'm right. Like, I'm not so sure I minded not being there for 3 hours every Wednesday. Can I say just a little thing about pipeline? I promise. Okay, it won't be little, but I'll work on it. Here's the thing about the pipeline, right? Like, yes, we need to work on the pipeline. Yes, we need to increase access. But I have found, in not all cases, but in some cases, people focus on the pipeline so they don't have to really think about it until 10 years from now. And the fact is, like you said, David, the keys are in the room already. People already exist with the skills to be hired at higher levels, with more money, with more pay. Those people already exist. I just wish people would go find them instead of going, you know what we need to do? We need to start a program that starts in kindergarten to make sure those people in 18 years come work at our theater. And I'm like, yes, that'd be great if you want to start a program that starts in kindergarten. But there are people who are also out there, professionals now, who exist and have the skills you're all looking for. Sorry, that was my end of pipeline rant.
It was a good rant. And speaking about pay transparency, I think that anytime an organization advertises for a position, you have to advertise the range. Let people know what they're dealing with and what they're applying for. Let's jump into, someone asked me, what is the Gateway program at USITT? 7 years ago, the industry lost a very important person by the name of Tanisha Jefferson. She was a production manager, stage manager, and an amazing friend to so many of us. And she was 42 years old, and she passed away from a massive brain aneurysm. And she was the chair for the People of Color Network for USITT. And she and I had written a piece about diversity in the booth, about the lack of stage managers, specifically Black stage managers in the industry, because the game we used to play at USITT was, let's count how many Black stage managers we know, and we could only get up to 5. So when she passed, there was a void there, and it took her passing to kick us in the butt to say, we have to do something about the lack of diversity in production and unearth this. So David Grindle came to me and said, we have X amount of dollars. We need to build a sustainable program in her honor. And I worked with Casey Alley Foreman and Tina Shackelford and many other great people in building the Gateway program. And what that is often it's a mentorship program, but oftentimes mentorship programs are, we find the mentors and then we go find the mentees. We do the reverse. So what we do is we look for 12 individuals from unrepresented communities There always has to be at least 2 Black bodies as part of the cohort. And then we find mentors for them. And what we do is we try to find them that have similar identity markers. So like in the second year that we did this, we happened to have a young stage manager who was Asian and white. And I was like, I happen to know a professional stage manager that is mixed that way. So we brought her on board to be a mentor for this young individual. So that's been going on for 7 years now, and has been highly successful. And we have people in great places now, that both mentors and mentees. So that is the Gateway program. Okay, we are going to move on to retention. And what does that look like? Larry, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about retention, and what does retention look like for an organization? So we've done the recruiting, we've done the hiring, we've gotten rid of unpaid internships, and now we have people in the door, and now they're leaving out the door again 2 or 3 years later. What do we do to actually keep bodies, Black and brown bodies, in our organizations?
Yeah, the thing I keep coming back to is complacency. Once you get them in the doors, the work is not done, because microaggressions are still a real thing, macroaggressions are still a real thing, and PWI is still a real thing. And so when you get those folks into the organization, making sure the organization caters to what they need to be successful. How can we change the environment? How can we make sure that everyone feels like they have access and opportunity and means to succeed and grow? If we're not looking at all avenues of approach to make sure that everyone across the spectrum feel like they have an equitable chance to reach new heights, then all that work is for naught. Because if we're not retaining those folks, that means that we're not doing our job and making sure that that workplace culture and environment is sustainable and welcoming and inviting and inclusive to retain those bodies and getting more bodies. So actually getting the people in the door is just the beginning of the work. And the work really begins with how do we make sure that our organization is keeping changing enough to make sure that we are welcoming and inviting, and our policies reflect the bodies with which we are trying to retain.
David, I know you mentioned it before, but I think that pay transparency goes a long way for retention. I think once it is evident that pay equity outcomes are being followed and that everyone knows it, there's a different feeling about the institution or the company someone's working with. I have to say retention, transparency is really important to that.
Did we lose? I think we lost David. Oh no, we're left on our own.
Left on our own, oh my God.
But I absolutely agree with you, Roma. Pay transparency is paramount. And I think also having people to have the opportunity to grow in that pay structure, right? Not only having pay tied to cost of living increases, but merit raises and things of that nature, giving people an actual metric to which they can get that pay increase and make sure that they do feel welcomed and taken care of. And so I think it's not just about transparency, it's about giving them also the knowledge of like, here, you're at this level, if you want to achieve this level, here are the very active steps that you could take. And not just, it's based on merit and maybe we'll give it to you in a few years because we think you've earned it. It's also about very actionable steps.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here. We're trying to get David back on the line. We're having some bad weather down here in South Florida right now, so that could be the reason for it, but we're trying to get him back on the line.
Are there any questions, I guess, in the chat that we haven't, or in the Q&A that we want to touch on?
Hi, everyone. So I'll be the other David that hops in here for a moment. There have been several things in the chat asking questions about microaggression and more examples of that. At the risk of asking you to educate people, Sorry, Roma.
I'm not against education. I'm against taking on a huge burden and responsibility of others' education. But I'll educate you, David. It's okay.
I appreciate that. But no, if we could have you talk about that, because I think that becomes one of those moments where we would, I'll just say, me, the white guy, isn't even aware I've done it.
I mean, I kind of think that is the hardest thing about microaggressions. And as a Black person, often by the time you're hit with the microaggression and by the time you've digested it, everyone else in the room has moved on. And you're like, wait a minute, that was a microaggression. And by that point, to bring it up, you have to be very strategic. As a woman, am I the angry Black woman now approaching this person about what they did? And I think that is the hardest part about microaggression. Anytime that it is something that is so minor that it kind of floats under the radar and it doesn't disturb anyone else in the room, but it takes you a second to process, I feel is the best way to describe a microaggression, if anyone else wants to chime in.
Ebony, I also think that sometimes when you're in a group, as we are backstage at the theater, that yes, something can be said, it's not feeling quite great. Perhaps like you, David, you're not aware of what you said. Sometimes some individuals are aware, but I always ask, who's the ally in the room? Who's the other white guy that just heard that? And guess what? You can say, no, 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 no. I don't appreciate hearing that right now. So it's sort of, if you hear something, say something. Sometimes it's very hard as a person of color to take on that role of like you say, angry Black woman, or isn't she the victim? And so we kind of swallow it, right? And hold that resentment. It would be so much more helpful if our allies could say, no, 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 David, no, you can't say that.
And tagging on to what Roma just said, there are about 3 to 4 master electricians that I work with that I always have my back. And I was so shocked the first time someone said something and they processed it before I did, and they jumped in and they were like, no, that's wrong. Like, what you just said was wrong. Shut up. And I was like, oh my God, like, who is this beautiful white man by my side? Like, and that gave me so much power in the room. And it made me feel safe.
You know, you also have to remember, to a large degree, right, racism is as American as apple pie. And so people say things in the moment and might not even realize the racist intent or tone behind it. And so going back to this idea, when you're in a PWI or you're the only person of color at the table and someone says something, it also could be like, oh, you might not even realize what you said is racist. So going back to what Ebony was saying, then it takes you that moment to process, to then you have to decide, am I going to speak up in this moment to say, you know, why this phase or this, you know, tone is problematic. Now, you know, you become that, you know, racism police, right? You become, oh, there goes Larry again, talking about, you know, why things are racist, this, that, and the other. So I think it's all too about educating our accomplices, right? The accomplice has to be willing to do the work of being anti-racist in the readings and the articles and the videos and the podcast, so they can start to recognize what these things look like. So it's not incumbent upon us to swallow the thing that was offensive and then have to be pleasant about how we educating then the entire room. And so it really is important for folks to be doing things like, you know, I will recommend from here to the end of my days, the Seeing White podcast, Seeing on Radio, Seeing White, because it really breaks a lot of this down. But if you're not doing that work, then you're going to lose those people in your organization, because that goes to retention, because now I don't feel safe. I don't feel like the organization has my best interest at heart, and I want to remove myself.
Just wanted to add too, like, if you're called out for a microaggression, that is somebody thinking you are capable of being educated. That is someone taking on that labor and thinking, our relationship is worth it. You are worth it for me to tell you why this was wrong that you just said to me. Right? I know I frequently have had microaggressions thrown at me, and I've processed and been like, this person is not worth it to me to even tell them that what they said was so incredibly hurtful, because then this will snowball into a thing, right? I will be the troublemaker designer, right? Who is not invited back because who wants trouble?
And especially, I mean, just to tag with you, Portia, I mean, depending on where you are in your career, that has huge implications. You know, if you're just starting out and you're doing your first Lord show and somebody, you know, microaggresses upon you, you don't have, you know, the standing, or you don't want to have the standing to say something to them. You know, every show that you're doing is your best show, and every space that you go into, you are interviewing for the next job there. So it puts an incredible amount of pressure on the young designer, artist, or whatever to actually act in those moments. So you know, it's incumbent upon, like Larry was talking about, it's incumbent upon everybody to just be cautious about how we're speaking to each other as individuals, and as artists, as craftsmen and craftswomen.
I'm back. Did anybody miss me? Technology is not my friend today. Be quiet, Larry. I won't hear anything out of your mouth. So someone was asking what was the podcast that Larry was referring to. It is, if you go to Scene on Radio, it's SCENE on radio.com. And the series within that is called Seeing White. So it is Scene on Radio, and the series is called Seeing White. And it's a fantastic podcast, as Larry mentioned. There's also a book that they reference often. It's called The People's History of the United States. It is a big, dense book, but it is an important bit of reading. I know that we are coming up close to time. One thing that I wanted to touch base on was, in this age of COVID, how does this affect this conversation? And I have to be honest that when COVID first went down, that I was extraordinarily concerned about equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts in predominantly white institutions going by the wayside for the sake of, we have to get back up and get our theater doors open. Therefore, ED&I becomes a nicety rather than a requirement. And it wasn't until the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement that I'm like, here we go. Now we have our momentum back. These were one of the things that someone had asked a question earlier about this, is that we have to keep this at the forefront. We have to keep these conversations moving forward. The hard part about it now is we don't get to see each other in person every day. So it's very easy to go from having the Black profile picture on your Facebook page to going back to pictures of kittens and what you're eating for dinner that night. That is privilege. Your privilege is the ability to walk away from this conversation and not have it affect your life one way or the other. Those of us that have to keep up doing this, that is not a privilege. We have to keep this work going. You now have the obligation of keeping this work going post-COVID. So you need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So with the time that we have left, I know that Cody has a poll that he wants to ask everyone, and then we have some departing words from Cody, but I want to thank first and foremost this panel of amazing, amazing individuals. We all will get together, I promise, both virtually and in person, so that, Ebony, you can have all the emotion and all the feels in person. Yes, that. We need all of that. And I thank you all for your grace and your vulnerability in the space and your stories. It is deeply, deeply appreciated from you. And Cody, I am going to, oh, and thank you all for everybody who has decided to stay with us. It is very much appreciated that you've decided to lean into this conversation.
Of course, yeah, thank you so much, David. I think David Grindle, did you want to say something before we wrapped up as well?
Yes, thank you to everyone who was here. There were so many questions that came through on the questions in the chat that it has opened the door for many more conversations. This is not a conversation. This is the beginning of many conversations. So if we didn't get to your question, it may become the basis of another panel discussion like this as we continue to move forward. Thank you all.
Thank you, David. I'm going to launch a quick poll. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screens now or on your phone, whatever you're looking at. It's literally just a simple yes or no question about how the usefulness of this webinar and conversation today. So if you take just a few minutes to answer that for us, that'd be great. And just to wrap us up, on behalf of all of us at USITT and LDI, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for today's conversations. I'd like to thank you all for joining us as well. We hope that you found this webinar informative and will take something from it to ensure a better tomorrow for our communities. We'd also like to thank our partners at LDI once again for their partnership and support in presenting today's webinar. We'd like to remind you of another great conversation coming up next Wednesday. It's titled A Global Conversation on Restarting the Performing Arts. We'll be joined by colleagues from Asia, Africa, Europe, and South America to learn how each are beginning to plan for performing arts in this pandemic. This conversation is being sponsored by our friends and industry partners at the Wenger Corporation. Again, that's a global conversation on restarting performing arts coming up Wednesday, July 15th. That's at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can get more information on this and register for it on the website. That's usitt.org. Thank you again so much for joining us all today. Wherever you are, we hope that you have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you back here soon.